Well, good evening, everybody, and tēnā koutou katoa. It's my huge pleasure to welcome you all to the seventh webinar in our thought leadership series, celebrating 10 years of the online MBA here at Otago. My name's Tony Gary, and I'm the MBA Director here at Otago. And this evening, it's my huge pleasure to introduce Steve Anderson. So, born and educated in Dunedin, Steve attended Otago Boys High School and the University of Otago, where he gained a BSc honours degree in geology, which I'm sure we'll get a few insights into, and an MBA in, was it 1982 or 83? I think, Steve?
83.
82, yeah. So Steve was appointed CEO of Foodstuffs, South Island in June 2000. In October 2010, Steve took on the role of Managing Director of Foodstuffs New Zealand Limited and became the chairman of Foodstuffs New Zealand Liquor Limited, or Liquorland, and Steve is now retired from these roles. Steve was the chairperson of Food for Thought Trust, a free nutritional education program that assists year 5 and 6 primary school children in making healthier food and lifestyle choices. In January 2015, Steve became a chartered fellow of the Institute of Directors. Steve has previously held roles at Mainland Products Limited as the General Manager of Sales, Shell New Zealand Limited as a retail sales manager, and Shell International Chemical Company, based in London as a business analyst. But tonight, Steve's going to draw on his experiences to give a presentation called Crisis, Resilience and Recovery, Learning from the Canterbury Earthquakes and Learnings from Adversity. Thank you, Steve. Over to you. Oh, sorry, one more thing before. Sorry, Steve. I just wanted to say, if you've got any questions, please could you type them into the Q&A box and we'll deal with them at the end. So sorry again, Steve, over to you.
Thanks very much, Tony. So today I want to talk about the detailed challenges that we faced during a number of the earthquakes in 2010, 11 and 16 and what we did about them. But I want to talk from three different perspectives. The first, as Tony said, I'm a trained geologist. So I'll talk about that and geophysics. And secondly, I was a CEO of a major food distribution and supermarket company. And the third, and a more personal level, as a husband and father. So first, the geologist in me. These events, they were terrifying. Absolutely terrifying to be in the middle of these events. But as a trained geologist, they were actually strangely fascinating to me. So I want to show you a video now of Kaikoura, New World, December 2016. No commentary needed. Clearly a huge event. This occurred around midnight, so there was only one person in the store, a cleaner, and he was fine. He was found outside smoking a cigarette in his car. He took up smoking again afterwards. This is the wine aisle, which has collapsed into the paper aisle, and amazingly, only 3 bottles of wine in that fixture there were broken. And now I want to talk about, so we've just seen the effects of a major earthquake in 2016 at New World Kaikoura. And I'll soon replay a very similar video, but I want to explain some geophysics and the impact of the various waves and the speeds that they show. So this New World is about 60 kilometers away from the epicenter of the earthquake near Culverden. And in this upcoming clip, I want to show you the 3 sets of waves. So the first is the speed of light. And this occurred when the earthquake occurred near Culverden, and it took out a major substation. And as a result of electricity, which travels at the speed of light, was cut off from Kaikoura. So you can see the impact when the lights go out, and there's about 5 to 6 seconds before the installed generators kick in. So you can see when the earthquake actually happened. The next is the P wave, which is the push wave. And this takes around 6 seconds to arrive after the initial quake. And these waves are faster and than the following waves. The following waves are the S waves, which are the shear waves. And they arrive around 3 seconds after the P waves. And the time difference between the P and the S waves is the way that geophysicists can accurately identify the distance to the epicenter. And then if you've got three different measures, then you can actually geolocate the epicenter through triangulation. So I will play another clip from New World Kaikoura, and I'll explain it as we go. So all good. That's when the earthquake occurred. Generators get kicked in. The P wave arrives. And the S wave. And then you can actually almost physically see the waveforms as the wrecking is destroyed. So the fact that New Zealand is susceptible to earthquakes is no surprise for anyone. We are a country sitting on a plate tectonic boundary between the Pacific Plate and the Australasian Plate. The Pacific Plate is to the east and the Australasian Plate is to the west. And as you can observe, the plate boundary runs up the west coast of the South Island, where the boundary is a strike-slip fault, with the west coast up to Nelson moving northwards relative to the eastern part of the South Island. This then transforms around Cook Strait to a subduction zone beneath the North Island, resulting in the volcanic plateau underneath the North Island. So due to this tectonic boundary, New Zealand is constantly being shaken by a huge number of earthquakes, of which most are not even felt. So each dot on this map indicates an earthquake. Occasionally, a big one occurs in areas where people are living, and as a result, their lives, to a greater or lesser extent, are disrupted. After a big earthquake, we normally experience an aftershock sequence where the initial earthquake creates many smaller earthquakes. And these constant aftershocks add to the stress and fatigue felt by those near the epicenter. Now to the more personal impacts, myself and my family. This is the story of the initial quake of the 2010 Darfield quake. This quake occurred at 4:20 in the morning, and I was awoken by the shaking, and it took around 5 to 10 seconds to understand what was going on. Our whole family was staying at home with my two eldest children back from other parts of the country. My youngest daughter was yelling out, and I thought it was for me, but my wife swears that she was calling out for her. I can remember trying to push out of bed to be able to get out of bed, but I felt like pushing on mush. I had no way of getting out of bed due to the intensity of the shaking. The noise was literally like a train or a 747 just outside my window. I can remember the paintings beside my bed which hung from picture rails, moving in the shaking around a foot either way. There was nothing else I can do but lie there and see what happens. Not really a great thing for a typical type A personality to not be in control of the situation. So once the shaking stopped, the family all got out of the house as quickly as possible, and we took stock of what had happened. Soon afterwards, I received a call from my GM supply chain to say that we had major damage in our warehousing, but thankfully there were no casualties, and I'll show you a video of that later on. This was clearly a huge relief. We immediately instigated a crisis management meeting, and it was agreed to have all the executives in the boardroom by 6 a.m. The amazing thing is that at 6 a.m. when I was driving to the head office, the whole neighborhood was in darkness. The head office stood out as if illuminated by a sea of lights emanating from the building using our emergency generators, whilst no power was available for the wider community. Every executive was there at 6 to start the huge job of recovery, and several of the executives were still in their pajamas. An important aspect to note here, and is to use an airline analogy, each had to put on their own face masks before helping others. And I was very grateful that they managed their personal situations so that they could be there. As an example of the sacrifice that they did at that stage, I asked one of my colleagues, Dave Pawson, how his house had fared as he lived in the eastern part of Christchurch. He said he had to drive through liquefaction to arrive at work. And I knew what liquefaction was due to my geological training. However, was a new world and a new word, and a lot of people did not understand. But boy, do we know now. My colleague's house was built on a swampy area adjacent to one of the rivers. So liquefaction occurs when you shake sediment which is saturated in water. The shaking means that the water squirts out of the light sediments and you get a volcano-like eruption of silty water. Dave said he thought it was raining after the earthquake as he could hear water on his roof. In fact, it wasn't raining, it was just water squirting out of the ground and onto his roof due to liquefaction. Despite this challenge, Dave was there. The worst aftershock occurred in February 2010. Its epicenter was in Christchurch and resulted in 185 deaths. The aftershock was significantly smaller in terms of energy release than the original quake, but due to its proximity to the city and the state of the swampy ground Christchurch is built on, it caused large amounts of damage and casualties. The engineering industry should be very proud that more casualties did not occur despite the large amount of damage to the buildings. To a great extent, people managed to get out of damaged buildings. The exception was two notable situations where buildings collapsed, tragically causing loss of lives, as well as older buildings, balustrades collapsing, causing deaths. So during this quake, I was in a car park building in the airport about to leave to fly to Wellington. As I was driving into a car park, I felt a shudder and I thought I was being hit by another car. I thought I'd stolen their car park. I quickly realized that I was experiencing another major earthquake. Looking ahead, I saw steel and concrete do things I had no idea that they could do. Once again, I thanked the engineers. I had no choice but to sit it out and wait until the shaking had stopped. In this case, it was 45 seconds. The weird thing is how you react in these circumstances. I got out of the car and I just couldn't think. I looked around, not really understanding what was going on. I then started thinking I would be able to go on and catch my flight. Clearly, the result of the earthquake meant the earthquake was shut. The airport was shut. I then started thinking of contacting my family, but I could not even work myself up. It was just too difficult in such a stressful situation, that everyday thing. I then got out into my car and went out of the car park. Thankfully, I was quick as the car park was shut very soon afterwards. Driving home was also a challenge due to the aftershocks, shaking the road, making it difficult at times. And I had to pull over and simply wait out another aftershock. I got home and found my wife cuddling the dog in the middle of the lawn. She was in the kitchen when the earthquake occurred and witnessed a crockery cascading from most of our kitchen cupboards. Once I confirmed she was fine, we managed to contact my daughter who was at school. I could put my attention to work. Once again, I put on my mask first. We had to instigate a crisis management plan with executives meeting in the boardroom, during which we once again had to endure aftershocks. I can relate several stories. However, the February earthquake caused a huge amount of damage. And as I said, we had fatalities, no power or water, and no sewage systems. I never thought I'd have to do this, but I had to dig a long drop in our garden. This isn't actually a photo of it. I didn't document my creation. This was taken off the web. Thankfully, we did not have to use it, as we're advised that the sewage system in our area was working. Little did we know that 50 meters from our house, there was a major crack in the sewer, and one of our neighbors had about 3 foot of sewage flowing into their wine cellar. Obviously, very distressing for them. But when we now have a neighborhood barbecue and they offer to bring anything, then the offer is quickly rejected for them to bring any wine. A positive of these occurrences is that the community came together. We got to know our neighbours very well as everyone was going around and making sure, particularly the elderly, were being looked after. New Zealanders are very lucky as poverty kills in earthquakes. A good example of this is the Haiti 2011 earthquake, which is remarkably similar to the Darfield earthquake in terms of magnitude, depth, and proximity to people. However, due to poor building standards in Haiti and compliance, over 100,000 people were killed in this earthquake, whilst for the Darfield quake, no one was killed. So that's me personally. Now, me as CEO. I was a CEO of a retailer-owned cooperative called Foodstuffs, which most of you would know. Our market share of the supermarket industry is more than 50%, and we also traded in food service, liquor, and convenience markets. There are about 1 million people in the South Island of New Zealand, and our mission was to feed the South, feed these people. We did not have other activities outside the South Island, and our sister cooperative called Foodstuffs North Island fed the North. We have a vital role to undertake in this regard, given the fact that on an average supermarket there are around 2 weeks of products on the normal trading levels before the shelves are empty. This also means within 1 week there is significant gaps as more popular and promoted products get depleted should supply not be available. Given the fact that in times of hardship, panic buying invariably occurs, the timeline between full shelves and an empty store is likely to be less than 2 weeks if supply is not possible. This fact led to our belief that if we cannot supply within 7 to 14 days, then societal anarchy is likely to occur. Therefore, it was imperative that we were able to get up and running to feed the South Island as soon as possible. Just to show how big a challenge we face, I will now show a video what happened to our distribution centre, one of our distribution centres in September the 10th, Darfield quake. As you can see, our crisis management team had a significant challenge. This is a photograph of that distribution centre in its entirety. We lost 5,500 tonnes of product, which was now effectively owned by the insurance company and not accessible. We had only 2 distribution centres, one in Dunedin, which is a lot smaller, around 250 kilometres away, and another in Christchurch, which had about 50% of its racking significantly damaged. I'll just show you some, this is the sort of damage we had in the racking at Papanui. Once again, lots smaller than the one that was destroyed. So that's how we got. So what did we do and what did we learn? First thing that we learned how important it was to gather data. As previously indicated, we had all executives available and we met in the boardroom at 6 a.m. after the earthquake. The first 48 hours were critical. The most important thing to do was to gather information on the status of the various assets we held. Individual executives were were appointed into roles and then sent to gather as much information as possible to then brief the crisis team, which was regularly scheduled. We resisted the impulse to just do something. Don't rush to do anything until you know the new reality. And the sort of things we had to resist was societal, media, and political pressure to rush things. And I found resisting that pressure was really tough at the time, but it was the right thing to do. So for the first 2 days, we simply had to understand how many supermarkets were intact and if they could trade, the status of our supply chain, food and distribution centres and logistics trucks, provision of water, electricity and sewage for our supply chain and our supermarkets and head office, Also the status of our IT systems, and even down to the level of diesel in our generators. At this stage, an important part of my role was not to lead the crisis management team, but to ensure the best possible executive was in place. And in this case, it was my supply chain general manager, John Mullins. My role was to have a helicopter view over the crisis team, as well as to be seen in fluoro, to be in the supermarkets, to be in the supply chain, and so that members as well as our staff could see the leadership was in place within the organization. I saw several forklift drivers in the warehouse who left their homes and families in difficult circumstances to come to work to help our damaged racking to enable us to start distributing again. They did not have to be there, but due to their knowing the importance of their role in our mission to feed the South, and that how important their contribution was to that role. I believe that having an operational focus led by John, focused on getting things done, and a helicopter overview by me significantly helped us to be more effective. Adversity test culture. This leads to a very important aspect. It is my belief that the culture within Foodstuffs was a very strong one. All staff understood what they were doing and why they were doing it. If they did not have that commitment, the real risk would then have been, would our staff have turned up when you really needed them? The trouble is that if you don't have a great culture when the adversity occurs, it's just too late. Invest in people. Little things matter here. And I'd like to take two angles. The first is, one, invest in a strong culture prior to the adversity so that people turn up when needed, as previously talked about. Make sure they know why they toil to feed the South and why their contribution is important and valued. And then is during that adversity, that's where the little things matter. And a few things that we actively did here. One was to provide free water and food to all of our staff to take home because if they were working within the distribution centres, they were struggling to get to look after their homes, so they could take that back to them. And we also opened up toileting and shower facilities to our staff as well as their families at the head office, as there were real challenges around provision of water. And a lot of our stores put a great deal of emphasis on opening their stores, even if it's in a really basic way for emergency supplies. And a number of times we saw individual owner operators going in and getting baby food and then providing it to loyal customers. People really went out of their way, invested in their people, their staff, and their customers. Get back to work. Everyone was working, trying to get back to work. But there was a lot of pressure to create short-term alternate fixes in order to do something, that pressure again. It is my view that far better to wait and then patch existing systems and supply chains rather than create new and novel systems. A good example of this is during this time, local and central government were attempting to organise the recovery from the earthquake, and the Mayor of Christchurch, Bob Parker, and the Prime Minister at the time, John Key, were both heavily involved. There were daily conference calls where local government, central government, and the vital industries were asked to contribute. For the first 2 days, there was a message going out from the government and police for Christchurch residents to hunker down, to stay at home, and attempt to sort out situations at home. This caused a significant issue as staff did not get back to work, and the clock was ticking down on the 14-day deadline I talked about. In one of the conference calls, I raised the fact that we need to change the message to get people back to work, not only in our supermarkets and our supply chains, but as well as other vital and crucial facilities like service stations as an example. The message was then quickly changed, which meant crucial staff started to return to work. In general, I believe that the central government's work to assist the immediate recovery of Christchurch post the quakes was very positive and professional. Clear communication was crucial to our success, to our staff, our suppliers, to local and national authorities, to our members, to our customers, and we did this well. We used multiple ways: text, websites, emails to suppliers, media, traditional and social. And we made decisive calls and then communicated them well. We agreed a small number of messages and for our communications, and we kept each communication very short. Another point was the reaction of suppliers to us. A very good example of the leadership driven by suppliers was I was called by the CEO of Sanitarium, Pierre Van Heerden, who is now the Grocery Commissioner, the day following the quake. Pierre was based in Auckland and he flew to Christchurch to be with his team and to show leadership. So Sanitarium is obviously a major breakfast cereal marketing company, had a factory close to our head office, which was destroyed by the quakes. Pierre's phone call was simply to ask our status as well as the promise of all support that they could give. Pierre and I spoke several times in the subsequent weeks. The point I wanted to make is that Sanitarium's major competitor came to us around 18 months later after the quakes and asked us why they did not sell as many products with us as they used to. The question I asked them was, where have they been? And the answer that the head office in the United States had banned any staff members visiting Christchurch because of the risk associated with the earthquakes. My answer was to why their sales was not so good was related to the fact that a major competitor had shown great leadership whilst they had shown none. In tough times, people expect leaders to be seen. Mayor Bob Parker was a great example of that, being very visible in his fluoro jacket. The same goes for businesses. Managers need to go out of their way in times of adversity to be seen and engage with their staff, their customers, their suppliers, etc. They need to be seen in fluoro as well. And I saw some fantastic leadership in suppliers as Auckland-based executives rushed to Christchurch for their staff. Pierre I talked about before, but another really good example was George Adams, who was at that stage head of Coca-Cola on the first plane down from Auckland. Great leadership. Management of fatigue. I think this factor is misunderstood or not understood well in crisis management, or not talked about enough. We started the crisis management team with a lot of adrenaline and some excitement. A lot of work was carried out by this team, and due to the constant aftershocks, rest was very difficult to achieve. Each day straight after the big quakes, the crisis team had to go physically under the board table up to 10 times. I know the underside of that table very well. And at night it was the same, as aftershocks forced my family and all of my executives' families out of their houses often during the night. As a result, about a week after the initial quakes, fatigue was causing some really unusual behavior by individual staff members, to the point that we had to manage time off with these people with the hope they would be able to catch at least some sleep. And a personal example I want to share with you now is something I did when I was, which I think was out of character, when I was in a fatigued state. So I want to talk about some emails I received and my reaction to it. So the first email came to our website at the time when I had just made many people redundant at a supermarket, which was destroyed by the quakes. In the photo, you can see a normal height engineer, and you will notice that the floor of the store has risen about a meter and was therefore clearly very structurally unsound, even though the store looks okay. Clearly, we're unable to continue trading, and we had sadly to make some staff redundant. So the messages came to our website. I've just read on New Zealand Herald that New Zealand has closed its Redcliffe and St Martin's stores. Congratulations, Foodstuffs, you have just lost a customer, and I hope many more than 230 Christchurch residents decide to do the same. He then took something off our website to prove that we were hypocrites, and then said, empty words indeed. I look forward to encourage all my family, friends, and colleagues and acquaintances to boycott Foodstuff supermarkets. And I will continue to remind anyone who will listen that at the very time Christchurch workers needed help and support, and within a week of the earthquakes, Foodstuffs turns its back. Steve Anderson, shame on you. I am proudly Cantabrian. He signed his name. This email was received shortly after the quakes, about 4 days after, I think it was, and I was very tired and a little bit grumpy. And I wrote the following email in response. Dear something or other, go F yourself. I've been working my A off, trying to make the best of a bad situation, and having the sort of criticism you are giving me does not help in the least. You mentioned the fact that you will never shop with us again. Can you please advise your name and address and anyone that you advised so that I can personally trespass you from all Foodstuff stores throughout the entire New Zealand? You make me sick. Regards, Stephen Anderson. I didn't mean regards. I wrote this email, but thankfully I didn't send it. I was very close to, and that's totally out of my character. However, just writing it was great therapy. But after sleeping, I typed the following message. Dear Mr. Given that I have personally been working tirelessly since last week in order to feed the South Island, being accused of shameful behaviour hurts. We are faced with destroyed stores, Redcliffe's is too dangerous even to enter, owned by local people who employ their staff. My job is to help these owner-operators through such a trying time. With no store to operate from, the owner-operators had no option but to make their staff redundant. We then entered into negotiations with insurers to negotiate a redundancy package better than stated in the contract, 2 months compared to 2 weeks. The Foodstuff Community Trust also provided $500 in grocery vouchers per full-time staff member to help them out. We also provided counselling and will make every effort to place staff into other supermarkets. I'm confident that we'll be able to place most of the staff who wish to be placed. We will then get the stores rebuilt, bigger and better, so we can employ these and other staff in the future. Am I ashamed of what I have done? No. Regards, Steve. This time I pushed send. And as previously said, writing the first one was great therapy, but I'm just so glad I did not send the first version. I thought this was the end, but weeks later I received this reply. Thank you for taking the time to reply. Emotions are running high, and I sincerely regret my outburst without knowing all the facts. I've learned a lesson. Please accept my apology. Regards. Stress does funny things to people. Adds stress and tiredness. It is definitely not a good combo. Preparation. Previously, we discussed culture. An excellent culture within an organisation is crucial as adversity significantly tests it. If culture is poor, then it's hard to react and recover from many adversities. One of the crucial things that Foodstuffs carried out around 18 months prior to the earthquakes occurred was to create a crisis management plan and to test it. We had documentation in place and we called a consultant to test us on how we would react. The consultant advised the supply chain manager to advise the executives they were running crisis management simulation process at the alternative location. The scenario was that the primary location, our head office, was affected by a fire and that the smoke had led to us not being able to use the facility. The alternative site was the distribution centre in Hornby. However, only half of the executive knew that was the case. The supply manager used the contact list once we managed to find it, and then he noticed that half of the information on the contact list was out of date. We managed to get nearly all the executives to the destination around 2 hours after we were called in. However, we forgot the company secretary, who did not know where the rest of the executive team were. They managed to turn up around 11 a.m. Once we were all there, the plan went well, and the consultant upped the ante in regards to the severity of issues, which put significant pressure on the executive. In general, it worked well, but the start was a total shambles. We drastically changed the documentation and created an app so that we could easily change the contact list. All this work was incredibly important when it came to the actual crisis. If we did not have this trial, we would have been significantly slower and less effective in our reaction in a real crisis. But the intriguing thing is that during the actual crisis, we did not look at the plan once as we knew what to do. The practice was probably the more important than the documentation itself. And the documentation had a lot of checklists which was quick to review rather than the other numerous documents. So in the heat of the battle, these would have been very difficult to read and understand. So a key learning here is to invest time and energy to ensure that you have a good crisis management plan, proven and tested. So in conclusion, our performance during the 2010 and 11, as well as the 16 earthquakes, will almost perversely be a highlight of the careers of all of our executives. They should be proud of what they managed to accomplish. We managed to get supply out of our DC within 48 hours, and we could recreate our supply chain to our stores so that anarchy was averted. The store shown in the opening video was trading in a basic way within 24 hours, and this is very, very important for the local community. We could do this by investing in our people before and during the quakes, ensuring we had an excellent culture where individuals knew what they were doing and, more importantly, why they were doing it. We invested in morale and pride during the recovery process by providing free food and water, providing showering facilities for staff and family. We gave staff every reason to get back to work, and most importantly, they understood they needed to get back to work. The leadership were there in fluoro. They kept everyone informed that they were staff, suppliers, customers, authorities, medias, as part of the recovery process and seen throughout the disaster. We did not rush our decisions. We managed our staff stresses and fatigue as best we could. We were prepared to invest in our facilities. We had a crisis plan in place that was tested prior to the actual adversity occurring. So a few questions for you. If you are faced with this scale of a challenge, do you have a plan? Have you tested? And is your corporate culture such that staff would turn up? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for those personal and sometimes very honest insights, both personal and professional. Can I just remind our audience that if they do have any questions, please could they type them into the Q&A box. Okay, first question, Steve. Did you bring in people from outside the region business to provide an independent perspective or assistance with decision making?
During the crisis, no. There was a couple of retired executives who said, "Hey, can I come in and help?" And we thought about that, but you really need people to understand the business really well. And what I did use was a couple of executives who didn't have a lot to do in their area. One was the food service executive and the other the IT person, because their IT systems just kept running. And you use those two people almost as special projects to go and help the retail person or the supply chain person. You just didn't have the time to be able to teach people how we worked. You really you had to know very well. So that's how we managed it.
Thank you. Do you wish you could have done anything differently with hindsight?
That's a really good question. I think we had there were a couple of decisions where we rebuilt things we probably shouldn't have, and we did it for insurance reasons and payout reasons. And uh, one of the most difficult thing in the rebuild, it was so difficult because in the past you had so much information about populations, and so you could figure out the best place to put a supermarket. Because of the change in the population as a result of the earthquakes, thousands of houses were destroyed. That means some people moved to north, some people moved south, some people moved to Australia. Uh, we had hardly any knowledge to be able to justify the rebuilding, and it wasn't, and there was some non-optimal decisions there. So without a doubt, but it was so hard to make those sorts of decisions 2 or 3 years later because of the paucity of data.
Because of course the demographics of Christchurch changed significantly in the following years, and I think still continue to do so.
Yeah, well, all you need to do is go through the red zone, and there was thousands of houses in that area and Dave Pawson's story, he was right in the middle of that area. All that's just um,
Mm.
parkland now, and they had to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, next question. At your time at Foodstuffs, South Island, after the experience you've just described, how often were crisis simulations run? And was it hard to keep the importance of the simulation engagement alive?
Well, we had a number of other ones as well. We had a major IT crisis where the motherboard caused a major issue, and it affected our backup. So and I was actually overseas in New York at that stage, and my team had to manage it without me, and they did a fantastic job. Um, the COVID was another one. So over the years, we were doing so many of them because of the various earthquakes, and a couple of other ones, floods as well. Um, that we only really had to practice that once.
Mm.
Um, but I think if you haven't had a crisis within 3 years where you're actually going into that crisis mode, uh, then you should be doing practices without a doubt.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Next question. Other than the culture enhancing practices you put in place during the crisis, what other practices do you use on a day-to-day basis?
In terms of building culture, this is such a difficult one because it's such common sense, a lot of it, and it's just being I'm a great I love Good to Great, the book by Collins, where he talks about level 5 leadership, and I think if you practice level 5 leadership, being humble and more than happy to delegate, take the blame and delegate praise. But actually, one example that I do in terms of praise and I learned this when I was with Shell, and I'd done this work with a colleague and had presented it to a very high level at Shell. And I was in my office 2 days afterwards, and a very senior person from Shell came into my office, and which I shared with another person, and he just came in and say, "Look, I just want to say that you did a fantastic job yesterday." And he went to my colleague and said the same thing to him. And whoa, that was amazing to me. And it didn't cost them a cent, other than him taking a bit of time. So one thing I did is if there's any time there was praise, I always got out of my seat and walked to the person and said that what a good job you did, or well done. I know you were in the coast to coast and did really well, or something like that. And also made sure that when I did that, then other people could hear it. Because it doesn't cost any money, and it builds people up, but it has to be real, and yeah, and occasional rather than constant.
Hmm. Thank you, Steve. Um, Oh, interesting one here. How did you deal with insurance claims and what was the total claim value?
Look, I can't remember exactly. It was huge, huge. We had this fantastic insurance broker, a guy called Howard Fraser, who had ended up at Crombie Lockwood, which is now Gallagher's, I think. Um, uh, we had a fantastic insurance policy, and we had to go through multiple insurance claims. My CFO did a fantastic job on it. Um, from my experience for insurance and dealing with insurance people, they will ask for a huge amount of data and information, and what you got to do is just give them heaps, um, because it's really hard to duck, and that's one thing, Foodstuffs had a lot of is data, um, you can just there you go, fill your boots. Um,
Mm,
because yeah, insurance people need that, but yeah, it's really important that you provide it to them. So we had really significant um, insurance claims because we had probably 4 or 5 total rebuilds of the supermarkets. We had that distribution center that collapsed. Yeah, it was huge
mm.
and took
Thank you.
years.
Another question here. With an owner-operator network, how do you manage responsibility for decision making and messaging between corporate and each store to ensure consistency?
It's very much led by the centre, um, and we had to agree the messages and communicate that out to the members so that they were communicating to their local communities with consistent messaging. And I had a very good PR consultant. Well, she worked for us, but the good thing is she was living in Auckland. And that was great because, she wasn't being affected by the aftershock. She was getting the sleep and stuff. So I was dealing with Antoinette, getting, agreeing what we're going to be communicating, how we're going to communicate it, and spreading it out. So um, there has to be really good communication between the members and the centre, but the members understand that because it's counterproductive if they start going off with discordant sort of communications.
Mm. Thank you, Steve. Next question. Culture is very often set at the top.
Mhm.
Have you had experiences through your career where you've had to manage upwards? And how did it go?
I think one of the best things that probably ever happened to me was my first boss. I won't mention names, but he was my worst boss. He was terrible, but I learned so many um, lessons from him. And He was a very hard man to manage because he was definitely not type 5 leadership from good to great without a doubt. But uh, adversity, you've got to in that situation you've got to manage it as best you can, and if it's not right for you, you need to get out. Um, I stayed at Shell, but I sort of moved into another division. But yeah, I think that's a tricky one. That really is. If you're not comfortable with the culture, you need to state your views, etc. But sometimes you've got to get out, and go to another organization.
Okay.
I never had to
Oh,
do that though.
just on the back of that, could you repeat the name of the book about level 5 leadership, please?
Good to great.
Can you remember the author?
Collins?
Good to great. Okay, thank you, Steve.
Good to great.
Um,
I think,
Probably,
I think it is. I'm sure it is. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Got another one here. How has what you experienced during this time improved and changed how you do business today?
Well, I'm
And
retired now, so
are there
um,
any practices that only came about because of this experience that you've kept?
no, look, I don't think so. I think uh, yeah, that's another really good question. But without a doubt, I think um, the learning around the helicopter and the helicopter comes from Shell because uh, in in the Shell reviews, there was two aspects that they really put an emphasis on how far you went within Shell. One was sense of reality, do you understand yourself? And the second one is helicopter view. Do you have the ability to get in a helicopter and up above a an issue and look at it from a strategic point of view? So I think the key learning from setting up the crisis management team and having that thing where the CEO wasn't doing the day to day, but very much on this helicopter view. Um, and I think far too many CEOs are, and a lot of chairmen are far too in the weeds and not in helicopters enough. And I often see examples of crisis management, and I think, oh, I'm not sure that you should be doing that. You should be uh, higher up than that. But anyway, yeah. So
Okay.
the helicopter view is probably the thing that I learned the most from Shell, but I've used the most.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. I've got one more comment here, and it's actually the author for Good to Great is Jim Collins.
Jim Collins.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's all of the questions, Steve. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, what really resonated with me, because I think I told you I was living in Christchurch at the time, was getting the news from a neighbour that the New World at Fendleton was open
Mm,
very soon after. I can't remember exactly, but it was a day or two.
yeah.
And we're actually giving bread and water for free, as well
Yeah.
as the store being opened.
Yeah, yeah, that's
So
our local. The Turners own that, a fantastic family, multiple generation grocers. But when when I went into work to start the rebuild, my wife was at home and she thought, well, what can I do? And so she went to the Turners and said, can I help? Because she was actually shopping there and there was hardly any staff. And so she ended up packing groceries in the checkout
oh,
um,
so she could have
for
packed
for
my
for a,
groceries.
yeah, for a few days, and there was a bit of a rumor going around that the Andersons were having a bit of trouble financially, and but she used to come back and report to me what was being in people's trolleys, and it was funny that there was quite a change in what was being purchased. There was a lot of water and stuff like that because people needed and stuff, but there's a
Mm,
lot of red wine and there's a lot of chocolate, and there's a whole lot of quite exorbitant things where people were saying, "Oh, I've got through an earthquake,
mm.
stuff it."
Does sound like my shopping list at the time, I have to
Yeah,
say.
that's right. But yeah, the chocolate sales I think went through the roof because people said, "Look, yeah, I'll come back to that diet later on, maybe."
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you again, Steve, for all those personal insights that you've provided us, but also for that professional insights as well on crisis management and leadership, um, and obviously the learnings that you took during the recovery period. So thank you very much,
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Steve.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay.